Hi good people, my name's Titus and today I'm going to show you how to create a simple flying drone mechanic that you can add to your projects. Let's not waste any time and just jump right into it. Alright, so starting off we have this simple drone static mesh. I did make this available for download for free on Fab, but you can of course use any drone static mesh you want. So first things first, we're using the third person template, and that's just to make this a little bit quicker and easier. We're going to come in the input folder, and under actions, we're going to create a couple new actions. We'll right click, select input, choose input action, and the first one we'll call IA_possess. And then we need one last action, we'll call IA_elevation. And those are the only two actions we're going to be creating for this prototype. We're going to head back to the input folder, and our third-person template comes with a default input mapping context file. We can double-click to open that up, and if we expand out, we can see it has the jump, move, and look actions. So if I play the prototype, I can run around, look, move basically, and of course, jump. But we want to add some additional inputs for the drone. Specifically, when we hit the plus sign, we can drop down and select the option for IA_possess. And then we'll also add the option for IA_elevation. Now we can begin to actually set up the button assignments. I think for possess, I'm going to click the record button and I'll press the F key so I can add in a keyboard binding for it. We can hit the plus sign here to add additional bindings. For this one, I'll hit the record button, and then on my gamepad, I'm going to assign that to one of the D-pad directions. And then for the elevation, what I'll do is I will hit the keyboard icon, and I'll do E for 1, and then I'm going to add another one, and I'll do R, but I'm going to add a modifier called negate to basically inverse it. And then I'm also going to add in another one, and this one will be the right trigger. And then I'll do one more to do the left trigger, but this one again will have a modifier to negate the value. And this is going to be my simple controller setup. So we can save that. There is one change we need to make in the actions. If we open up the elevation key, it's currently a true-false boolean. We actually want a float value so we can get positive and negative values. And then we can use that to control the up-down basically. You could also separate them out into two separate actions and assign them to two different buttons that way as well. So however you want to do it. But this basically completes the controller setup. So now we're simply going to go into our player object. So that'll be under blueprints. There is a BP_third person character, or whatever blueprint you're using for your player character. And it already has the controller logic built in for the movements and stuff, which is nice, saves us some time. So now we can just simply add in the only action that we made for the player, which was IA_possess. This is basically a key button that we can have the player press to control or take over the drone. I don't want to use triggered, I want to use started. The reason being is if we come into a print string and I compile and save, if I press the possess button, you'll notice I press it once, but it fires multiple times. Same thing with the controller. And that's because on the triggered instance, it basically fires for however long the mechanism is down for. A better option for this would be started, which only fires once when it's pressed. So now when I play the prototype and I press F, I have to manually push the key multiple times so there's no accidental misfires, which is perfect. We'll get rid of the print string though. So for started, we will do a simple get actor of class. We can search for your drone object. I called mine BP_drone. And then we want to possess it. In order to possess something, you need to basically control the soul of it, and the soul resides on the controller, whether it's an AI soul or if it's a player soul. So we want to basically get the player controller class, and then we can pull off that pin and find the possess function. And then we can hook up the execution pins and pass in the return value. So we're basically saying, get the item we want to possess, the physical manifestation, the object in the world, and then we get the player controller, which is going to have the, it could be an AI controller or it could be a player controller, it doesn't matter. But that will basically house the soul, which means we can actually call the possess function on it. And just with that simple bit of code, we can compile and save. And now if I push my possess key, I take over the drone. Or if I press the controller key, which was up on the D-pad, it'll take over there. And that works good. There is one issue with the drone though. So let's go ahead and go to our example folder. We're going to open up the blueprint that houses the static mesh for the drone. And you'll notice it doesn't have a camera in it. So we want to put in a camera so the player basically has something to take over when we possess it. You could just add it to the capsule component, but this static mesh does have some animations. So what we can do is we can attach it to the socket and then have the camera follow along on the socket so you get that sway. So there's a skeletal cube here, which is part of the socket. So I'm going to highlight that and then add the camera so it is a child of that object, which means I get the sway, but it also means that because the skeletal cube has a very small scale, because it's used for a Niagara effect that we used in a previous video, that means our camera is exceptionally large. So we're going to bump it down to be 0.1 so it's more manageable. And then we need to rotate it because it's facing the wrong way. The little eyepiece goes up, so we can press E to go in rotation, and then just rotate it back, kind of like that. Then we'll press W to go to translation, and I'm going to pull it forward a couple spaces, so maybe right about there. So now when we compile and save, we can play the object, play the prototype, I should say, and then we'll possess. And now you'll notice I still can't move or do anything, but we got that nice sway from the built-in animation, which is kind of cool. But that's just the possess function kind of doing what it's doing. What we need to do is actually set up the blueprint so it can use the controller stuff that we basically set up earlier. So we'll go back to the drone, and in the event graph, there's nothing here. So the first node we will do is called event receive controller changed. So we'll select that here, and then we can pull off into a cast to the player controller. We'll pass in the new controller into the object field, and then I recommend pulling off the blue pin so you can find the enhanced input local player subsystem, which is the bottom one here. And then again, you'll want to pull off the blue pin here and do the add mapping context. This function allows you to assign the input mapping context file that you created earlier. In this case, we're using the third-person template, so it was made for us, but it's basically the one where we assigned all those actions and buttons. So now that we have that set, that is basically the code to get the controller reading. So now we take over, it can basically read the inputs, but just because you can read a controller doesn't mean it's going to do anything. You still need to code and set up logic for it to basically know what it's supposed to do when you push a button or a joystick. So let's do the move first. So we'll do IA_move. We will split this action so we have individual access to the X and Y. And then we want to come into a add movement input. And then we can duplicate that because we're going to do it twice. So we need to figure out the world direction. For the movement, if we look at the actual move file, It's using, of course, WSAD and the 2D axis. And it's probably better if I show you maybe the input, give you an idea of what we're working with here. So it's a 2D or a vector 2D. So there's an X and Y, so you can imagine like just a simple XY graph. So you have your left and right and your forward and backward. The X is going to be the left and right, and the Y is going to be the forward and backward. So we'll do the forward and backward first. You can do that by getting the forward vector. And then you can pass that into here. And then for the scale value, just pass in the Y value. And that'll actually scale that correctly. And then same thing with the second movement. Instead of the forward vector, though, you want to get the left and right. We can do that by getting the right vector. And then if you wanted to get the z-axis, the up-down, you can get the up vector. So forward vector, right vector, up vector. These are very common ones you'll use in your development. For the second one here, though, we are going to pass in our x value. And we can kind of test this out. There's going to be an issue with it, but let's see what it looks like. So now if I possess, you'll see I can move. That's me pushing D, and this is A, and this is W, and this is S. So it's not exactly fluid movement. It's very strange. It's very, it's kind of like, I guess, tank controls, I guess. But definitely not what we want. There's a few issues with it. So let's see if we can get something a little bit smoother. The main issue is it's using world direction because we're not passing in a rotation. So if you move the player to the right and then you want to move to the right of that, we can't do that with this setup because it only uses world rotation. So it can only basically go off the starting point. So to be able to get that, we want to get a reference to some object on the drone. In this case, everything's childed to the capsule component, so we can just use that. But you could use the mesh or anything else you want. Doesn't really matter. So we'll grab the capsule component, and then I can get the current world rotation of this capsule component. And then I can pass that into the forward vector as well as the right vector. Like so. If I can move this down here. All right, and that gets us almost there. The other issue is on the built-in character movement script that Unreal offers you. You want to make a couple changes to this. The default land movement mode is set to walking, so it's treating it like it's a person. Since we're flying and we're using a drone, let's actually switch that to flying, because I think that makes more sense. And then we'll want to scroll down, and under the flying section, the braking deceleration, let's add maybe 50 units. So you won't just, there's no, basically right now there's 0 friction, so it'll continue forever. So we're basically adding a little deceleration so it's not like it's on glass. I think 50 will be a good number there. But the other thing is the rotation settings. Currently we're orienting the object towards the movement. It's good for some cases, but for this one, let's actually just use the controller's desired rotation, and we'll set the X and Y to 0, and we'll only let the player move in the Z axis. And I think 500 is probably fine. So with these small changes, I can now kind of move over, and you can see I can kind of get, it's a much more smoother. You'll notice I'm not rotating, and that's because I haven't set up the look code yet. But this will get us the ability to basically rotate and then move off of that existing rotation. And I'll show you that here in a second. So let's go back into the drone. And then look code's actually pretty simple. We'll just do IA_look. It's actually easier than the player code because we're only using one. We'll split it, and we will just add in the controller yaw input, and we'll pass in the X value. And that's kind of actually it. There's still an issue with the top piece that we'll have to come back to. But now if we were to play this, I can now look around. And I can actually, like, now that I'm looking over here, I can go left and right when I'm looking this way versus, you know, only, you know, going left and right from this direction. It's kind of hard to explain, but like if you kind of test it out and do it, you'll see exactly what I mean. But this moves a little bit smoother. It's a little bit more fluid. And then if I stop, that deceleration kicks in and it can actually go back into a nice idle. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So let's go back and I think before we fix the move code, because there is an issue with it, let's actually demonstrate the problem that it's going to have. Let's go ahead and do the elevation code, or the ascending, whatever you want to call it. We can use triggered, I think that's fine, but we're going to want to use a variable. Let's maybe call this our elevation, and we'll set that to be a float. Compile, save. Setting it to 0 is fine, because we're going to hold the Alt key, drag it in. Basically, when we press this, we're going to tell it to set this. And then after we set this, we will add a movement input, just like we did over here. And then the world direction will be the up vector. And we can pass in the up vector here, and we can use the elevation as a scalar. And then when this is canceled or completed, we'll hold the Alt key. This is probably unnecessary, but this is just to be safe. Basically, when it's done, it's going to set it back to 0, but this fires off so many times afterwards, it'll likely read 0 anyways. This is just kind of a double check. So now, if we take over the drone, I can basically ascend and descend, and I can even control that by how hard I press the left and right triggers on the controller. Won't be able to do that so much on a keyboard, but anything that has the ability to read fine tuning controls like you can on triggers, you can basically control that. But there's an issue you'll notice is when I'm moving, I can't go up or down. And that was kind of what I wanted to demonstrate. You can't call the add movement input from 2 different locations at the same time. That's actually why they're cascaded, like waterfalled on the move code, because it just doesn't work. It can't handle that logic. But that's okay, because we can still make it work. And that's why we're basically storing the values in this this variable here. So we're setting it in the event that we're not moving, or we're not calling the move event. So if we're just stationary going up and down, it'll still fire and this will work fine. But in the event that we're moving, we can come off and do an add, and then we can split this structure pin, and then we'll do it for this one too. Add operator, and then we'll split the structure pin, and then we can just pass in the elevation in the Z value. So it'll basically add it to the other vector, and then we can pass this in as the new world direction. And then compile and save. And if it'll let me, there we go. All right, and now if we play, we can move, we can go up, we can go down, we can stand still, go up and down, and no matter which direction you're going, we can basically fly around the map with relative ease. Now the other issue is I don't have a way to swap back to the player. So if I push the possess button, it doesn't actually possess the player. I'm stuck in the drone mode basically. I get apostrophe tab, and then I can actually see like both objects here, which that's cool. But let's actually finish this tutorial out by simply calling or setting up the possess event in the drone. And again, we don't want to use triggered, we want to use started, so it only fires once. And we can get actor of class, we can get our player pawn, which is third person character. And then remember, if I try to call possess, it's not going to work, right? We need to get the player controller, because the player controller houses the soul, which means I can possess. And then I can pass in the return value as the new pawn. Compile and save. Now when I press up, I can switch over. If I press up on the D-pad again, I can switch back. So I have an easy way to switch between drone and the player. And then I'm in the walking mode on the player, and then I'm in flying mode on the drone. Alright everyone, I think we'll cut it here to keep it relatively short, but I hope you found some informative value that you can take into your own projects. But as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.